Welcome to the October 4th, 2023 installment of the multi-network KEP. Mache is not available this week, so I am leading the call currently. It looks like our agenda is wide open. So that being said, I'll open the floor to anyone who's got topics they'd like to kick off the meeting with. All right, looks like that's making
Okay,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just a very quick thing. So we've been talking outside of this meeting about an implementation or a reference implementation, and so this KEP is defining an API. I guess somebody ought to be creating some kind of reference implementation in an ideal world. I just wanted to mention that possibility. I know that Doug, you and we started off a conversation about that. We haven't got very far with it, but I wanted to mention that here so people are aware that we've been talking about that. If anyone is interested in that, if anyone has ideas for what a good representation, good reference implementation would look like, we'd be very interested.
I think I'd be interested in that conversation. I tried to have a look at the demo that was done last week or 2 weeks ago. Try to take a stab at rebasing that and binding that to all our implementation. But
okay, that sounds good. What I should do is I should get a link to this that is shareable. If I try and paste it now in the middle of a meeting, I'll do it wrong 3 times before I get it right. So let's cut that out. I will find a shareable link and I'll add that to the agenda here so people can go and have a look at it. I should emphasize that where we're at the moment is I've written some stuff down. It's just stuff I made up. We're not at a stage where if you look at it and think, hey, this is all wrong, I'd be surprised. But I think it's worth having a conversation about, well, if we were to put together a reference implementation, what would it look like? I kind of started when we did the hackathon project. We just modified Multus. I don't think that's the right long term, but I don't know what the right long term is for an equivalent to Multus. So
no, and also yeah. I think it would be, so we are taking quite another angle. We're trying to embed that into the implementation that we have currently on top of Calico. So bringing in a use case, and I think it's nice also to see where this brings us. If we hit any blocker while implementing, things that can provide feedback on the specification, I think that would be
yeah, and absolutely, because I have very firm views on what everything should look like, because I know what the use cases I see are. They're not everybody's use cases, so almost invariably I will produce something that satisfies my use cases, nobody else's. So the more eyes on it, the better.
Yeah, same here. Thanks.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for starting that conversation. I agree that it's really important as well. And yeah, I think that it's going to take some discovery here between, what tools and modifications do we need in order to satisfy the requirements of the KEP itself, but also for everybody's use cases. I think that's a really interesting discussion. And I mean, coming from a network plumbing working group of BIAS, which is the group, as most of you probably know, that came up with the net attached F that Multus uses. It's another thing that I want to do from that perspective, is to continue the conversation with network plumbing working group about how does that specification change to say, how does it interplay with what we've got here. And yeah, I think there's a lot of important questions to ask with that kind of existing implementation. Is there are people out there that use that implementation, and this is what we're going to have going forward. And what what does it look like when you kind of have that journey between these two as well? And it's more of a network plumbing working group conversation, but just a heads up that I want to try to continue that. And I think with what Peter has started off is maybe a good stepping stone for that group as well.
Yeah, I think my perspective on it is largely that Multus does 90% of what we want already. How does it fit in with this model? How can we make it better? What's that? Obviously, other people are coming at this from a non-Multus perspective.
Totally, yeah, and I think both worlds are totally valid, and I do think, and granted it's a biased stance, but that there's a lot of useful tools that come out of network plumbing working group, and I'd like to see that those you know, become better to use in a situation like this, because at least for me, something that I see as a like major advantage of the work we're doing in this group is it's going to be better for Kubernetes developers, for people that make controllers, that make operators, to be able to interact with these assets in more of a Kubernetes native fashion, rather than, say, for example, munging JSON that's packed inside of a Kubernetes object, right, is not as intuitive. So yeah, I think that it's the old curse, may you live in interesting times. I think we've got a bit of that. Cool. Pete, thanks for bringing that up. I owe you some review and contribution to that doc as well, and I appreciate that you started it. Rough is great. That's the best place to start.
Is there, the only thing I haven't found in the spec, is there some form of assumption that either all of the API has to be implemented or only some, like similar to what is defined in Gateway API, or like a set of core capabilities that absolutely have to be supported? I know, like for network policy, this was kind of a little bit split and even undefined in the beginning a little bit.
So I do think that we've decided to kind of chunk this up into a few phases. And at least the way I understand it now, and I could be slightly off, but I think the kind of flow here is define the use cases, which you've already done for by the beginning of this year, 2023. And then we're in the next phase, which is to define the API and to implement it, which may have some changes to core logic of Kubernetes. I kind of think that it's like maybe unwritten rule that you kind of don't make an API without some type of logical change associated with it. And then the next phase will be for having the modifications to other relative components within Kubernetes. So for example, services, network policy, etc. I think that that's the next phase. There's also a phase that's kind of running in parallel as well. And thanks to Mike Zappa on this one, is for looking at what's necessary in terms of changes on the runtime side. So we've kind of figured out how to run that in parallel, so that this effort isn't necessarily blocked by waiting for decisions on runtime. And for what it's worth, I think that that's a fairly important discussion from CNI type of standpoint, right? So if you're somebody that has software that uses CNI, well, some of these changes to the runtime to like carry information that we need from this spec down through the runtime is important, especially because it's going to be your runtime that has the CNI implementation, right? It's going to be your caller for CNI. So I think that that's interesting as well. However, yeah, gist of this particular spec is that CNI is an implementation detail, right? So you're not necessarily required to use that, and nor does the spec kind of specifically call it out. I wouldn't be surprised if as we work through reference implementations that we might have like an associated set of I don't want to say documentation, but maybe addendum to our specification to like call out pertinent details for people that, for example, do use CNI or maybe some other implementation. But I think it's easy to say that CNI will be used by some implementations, right? But yeah, I think that's generally the gist. If there's anyone that wants to kind of add on to that timeline, I'm happy to hear it. But that's my like vague recollection, is that we tried to chunk it into three, 4, maybe 5 phases. But I kind of think that we're approaching the sort of middle here before we get to services, which I do think services and other pertinent assets. But yeah, services is going to be a challenge, I think, and was really when this kind of idea for multi-networking Kubernetes was brought to SIG Network back in 2017 initially. It was looking at services that kind of made everybody go, no way. But I think the good news is that that code has improved over time, and with dual stack services have changed since then quite a bit too. So I think it's possible. I just think it'll be challenging.
I think, Doug, for the current version that we have set upon, what you call phase 1, I think, I don't think you can remove pieces from there, right? It will be the current spec that we have for phase 1. I think it's hard to. I've been trying to think whether you could remove certain functionality from your implementation, but it will be hard because we hardly have anything.
One concrete example that came to mind is just like, for example, we're doing everything except for the DNS config right now. Because we're doing DNS config just differently, but we don't have a way to currently do DNS config via network specification. As this is one example, right? We clearly add this, but if we would go right now and just map and implement this as is, we would have everything except for the DNS config piece in there. And instead of allow namespaces, we have allow labels, which is pod labels and namespace labels and namespace names. But otherwise, it's like full implementation of what's in the API spec right now.
Yeah, but I don't think
hence it's the question, like,
we didn't specify the DNS part, basically, right?
Yeah, I think so. The question would be if we would implement this and say, hey, we're having an implementation of this CAP, but we would just ignore the DNS config directive in there, then would that be acceptable or not, right? For Gateway API, this is defined. What are the things of the spec that you absolutely have to implement, and what are like optional? What is optional intent that you don't have to support? But it's also fine if we're just saying I'm not like actually even leading into any direction. I'm just asking if this has been already defined.
Yeah, no, we did not. But I think the DNS part itself is part of the IPAM, right? Is it
It's
specified?
part of the network spec as currently proposed here. Like there's IPAM and DNS. So it's it's a network spec, but it's alongside IPAM and alongside the route
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, we have not done that, right?
I'm not sure. You were saying you have not specified whether anything is optional for
yeah.
implementation. Okay,
Yes,
yes.
correct. I don't think we even went into the DNS side, just to be clear.
Yeah, I couldn't actually find a reference to DNS in the CAP document. We
Because
did.
today, yeah, because today in Multus, right, it's kind of implicit through IPAM, and from my understanding. That's why I'm saying is if it's implicit in the IPAM, we haven't really gone into that.
Right, and I go ahead.
I'm looking at the wrong document. Maybe.
The document that I've got up right now in chat is here. And I think that we decided last week that we used to have, let's see if it's still in here.
And the IPAM, it was only external, right? So I think we skipped some of that even.
Yep, so we removed what we had for IPAM, yep.
Yeah, so there is not even a reference anymore, Thomas, today in the current proposal for phase one. This is.
This may actually be the original proposal that Maciej shared, like all the way back. Maybe that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I do have one that's called CAP multi-network requirements.
Yes, that's the ambition.
Okay, I see. Oh, okay, okay. So that's the ambition. That's not what's in there. That's not phase one. This okay. Now I get it. Now it makes sense. Thank you.
Any other commentary on IPAM/DNS?
That's good. It's like it's super well aligned with what we have. But I think Salim is super happy.
I think it will be
Awesome.
fairly straightforward to do that. I think what we have right now. It's very basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I see as some advantages of what we've come up with is there is a number of items that are kind of optional and allow for some flexibility in how this can be used. So I think that that's an advantage of what we've come up with. Any other topics for the open floor? The floor is open for any topics that you may desire.
Was there any feedback on the meeting that was there on Thursday? I could not.
So I missed it as well. I did chat with Maciej about it briefly, but what it sounds like is that it was more of Maciej presenting the idea from his deck. And which I believe is this one here in chat. So he presented this, but not a lot of feedback from that. So we actually have gotten more feedback, specifically last session. So yeah, no big feedback then. I'm gonna guess, there'll be more when, it comes down to, picking some details in the cap. I think that Mache is also planning to, bring, these slides, maybe in a slightly modified form, maybe as is, I'm not sure. To other groups as well, so probably, I would guess SIG Node and, SIG API. Among others, maybe. Anyone else with topics of discussion? All right, in that case, I think that we can keep it short and efficient. I appreciate everybody's time and the valuable discussion, and yeah, I appreciate everyone showing up. So yeah, thank you everyone, and catch you again in 1 week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks, Doug, for hosting.
No
Thank you.
problem. All right, take it easy. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.